I hope you remember that my pen name is G.L. Robinson. My real name is G.L. Donohue, and the reason why I chose that it's my pen name, as my pen name is because it's my maiden name. And when I first started writing, I had a lot of sex scenes in my books, and I didn't want my granddaughters to read. So I didn't use my own name. But then I cut them all out because I found out that people who read my genre of literature, which is some of the books are over there, actually don't really like it. And so I cut them all out. And so I could have saved myself the aggravation, because it has been an aggravation having a different name. But it's too late now, because I have 11 books published, and I'm not going to go back and change. So there we are. Anyway, today I'm talking about a brief, very, very brief history of etiquette at table. And just to give you this quote from Lillian Eichler, who wrote this book on etiquette. It's the oldest one. I have 3 books on etiquette here. As you see, this is the earliest. It's 1930, and these both are 1950s, and they seem to be getting fatter and fatter. And I don't know if it's because etiquette is becoming more and more a subject of dispute or what. But anyway, in the first book, I have this quote. She said, one of the chief distinctions between anarchy and a social organization is that society has worked out for itself various rules of behavior for all phases of human activity, and the well-bred person must understand the requirements, and I like the last bit, and put them into practice with grace, ease, and poise. So that's what we're aiming at, is not only to do things right, but to do them with grace, ease, and poise. And of course, the dining table is one of the chief places that we see this in action. In fact, even Lillian has at the very front of her book, the picture she chose to put, is, you probably can't see it because it's black and white, is a dining table all set up. And then in each of the books, a fairly substantial portion is devoted to dining etiquette. In this book, it's that many pages. In this book, it's even more, this many pages. And in Amy Vanderbilt's book there, it's about the same. So obviously, it's a topic that has always interested people. However, I'm going to begin at the very beginning with the ancient Greeks. And there's ample evidence from pottery and wall carvings that the ancient Greeks ate lying down. Now, I quite often feel like I'd like to eat lying down, but of course we don't do that anymore. But what is interesting about this is that they appear to need a lot of encouragement. These two people are sort of waving these two guys on, which I find interesting. And then a very interesting musical instrument here that this lady is playing. So not only did they need encouragement, but they seem to have definitely needed musical encouragement. So going back to the Greeks, also another picture, I like this, playing that same strange instrument. Did you see that? So sorry, I've lost the pointer. Get it back. There we go. There we go. This guy is, I suppose he's eating, but he's mostly listening to music. Anyway, so just that was the Greeks for you. The Romans, pretty much the same, lying down, we know that too. This person here has got an empty bowl because he seems to mind it too much. But he seems to be asking for more, a bit like Oliver Twist, but can't be bothered to get up and get it for himself, presumably. So, there we are. And also, this guy here seemed to need a lot of help. He's the only one eating. The other two people are helping him. This woman here, I think it's a bunch of grapes she's hanging over his head. It's very hard to see from this mosaic. But music again. Anyway, so suffice it to say, eating was quite a to-do back in the times of the Greek and Roman. However, and I've always thought that maybe it was one cause of the fall of the Roman Empire, because when you think about it, if the Huns were at the gate, it would take you too long to get up from the table. Well, it wasn't a table, to get up off your bed, clear away all the maidens who were serving you food, and get your swords buckled on. So I've always The way they ate was one of the causes of the fall of the Roman Empire, though I have never seen that in any book. Now, the Dark Ages, it is completely blank because we have no idea what they did. I have no idea. I think maybe they, I don't know what they did. I said, what would I say? Perhaps they ate lying on the ground. It was a barbaric age, so maybe they just ate with the animals lying on the ground. We don't know. But we do know that by the Middle Ages, there were tables. People were no longer lying down by the Middle Ages, but only important people were on chairs. In this picture, which is actually taken from the Bayeux tapestry, you can see that the king here, or the royal personage, I don't know that it's the king, you know he's the king because he's wearing the blue with the fleur-de-lis on it, and the bishops, members of the clergy, who we know they're always terribly important and have always over the course of history done very well for themselves, and they are sitting down, whereas everybody else is standing up and milling around buffet style, right? All of these people. And furthermore, this whole group of army is attempting to come in for a meal, although how they're going to get anything, I really don't know. But that's for the Middle Ages. Well, another picture here. They had plenty of space because they only sat on one side of the table. Plenty of space here. For look at this, is a whole peacock is being served. You know, obviously they needed the space. We do know in the Middle Ages that there were no forks on the table, only knives. And the way we know that actually is because we have a quote from Chaucer, the Prioress's Tale. I don't know how many of you have read Chaucer when you were in school, but I did. The Canterbury Tales was first published in 1400. Chaucer tells us that the Lady Prioress was so refined that from her lips she let no morsel fall, nor deeply in her sauce her fingers wet. So she ate with her fingers, didn't have a fork. She'd lift her food so well, she'd never get a single drop or crumb upon her breast, which I'm quite sure was important if you were the Lady Prioress. But present-day teenagers would be right at home with that, right? Eat with your fingers, no forks required. Then in the Renaissance, we begin to see people eating more or less the way we do today, on both sides of the table or all around the table, although in this particular picture, their manners do leave a little to be desired, because I'm sure you know it is not etiquette to turn your back totally on the people next to you, as this guy here seems to be doing in order to converse with the lady, who is in any case turning her face away from him. These two gentlemen here seem to be quite good friends, and this guy here has got his arm around the lady. So they're not paying attention to anybody else either. So obviously sitting at table and having good manners were not necessarily the same thing. This one, the company here is very mixed. I love this picture because we do see people seated on both sides of the table, although a couple do seem to be crouched at the end. One guy here is offering what looks like a parrot. Oh no, wait a minute. There's one guy here is offering here he is, looking a martini or something of the sort. You see this? This guy is offering a parrot. This guy here it's not terribly clear what he's offering. I'm not sure if it's a boa constrictor or it's half of his cloak. I'm really very hard to tell, but anyway, obviously, a lot went on at the table that had nothing whatsoever to do with eating in the Renaissance period. This all came to an end. Well, it didn't come to an end suddenly, of course. Gradually, over years, it came to an end. This rather unstructured way of eating at table came to an end with Catherine de' Medici. Those are her dates. Wife of French King Henry II, who brought the good manners from Florence. Not only good manners, but also a new way of eating. She wasn't particularly good looking, as you can see. In fact, I wonder why she's holding that powder puff, because it's not going to do her much good. But in any case, she knew that the old adage was the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. So she introduced into the court at least somewhere to sit down properly, not have your food served willy-nilly with a parrot 1 minute and a boa constrictor the next. And she also introduced into Europe, into France, the first French desserts, for which we can blame her for all of our weight problems. So if you're looking for somebody to blame, her name again was Catherine de Medici. Just remember that name, because she's the one whose chef invented choux pastry, which makes, of course, cream puffs. And she also introduced jellies, frangipane, which is, of course, almond paste, macaroons, and items from the New World, like pineapples, because those are the beginning of the exploration of the New World, and people were bringing back to the French court all sorts of things that they'd never seen before. And she had her chef, she had a very good chef who introduced them. Now, so at the same time as food becoming more, well, table manners becoming more structured, let's say, tables themselves becoming more structured, and food becoming more varied, the first celebrity chefs arrived on the screen. This is Vatel. He committed suicide in 1671 over the non-arrival of fish for Louis XIV. Now,
macaroni and cheese.
Well, evidently they had not yet got that delicacy imported into the French court. We do know that Gordon Ramsay runs about having a fit, but I don't think he's committed suicide yet. Now, however, this guy Vatel did, because we know this because Madame de Sévigné, who used to write to her daughter from the court of Louis XIV in the 1600s, tells us that when the fish didn't arrive for the king's dinner, Vatel said, "I shall never survive this disgrace." And a courtier called, his name was Gourville, laughed at him, whereupon he went up to his bedchamber, put his sword against the door, and ran against it repeatedly to stab himself in the heart, which he ultimately succeeded in doing after 3 attempts, and then the fish arrived. So, that was the sad story of Vatel. So beware of being a celebrity chef, is all I can say. So menus weren't introduced until about a century later. So we're jumping now from like 1600 to 1700. We're playing fast and loose with history here. This menu actually is the oldest one I could find, and it's very hard to read it. But if you look here, it was Monday, the 21st of June, 17, either 51 or 61. It's hard to tell from the letters, but 51 or 61. What is interesting here is that by now, under the influence, which now 100 years later, of Catherine de Medici, dinners began to be ordered in a certain way. Until that time, and if I went back to those early pictures from the Middle Ages, you would see that on the table was food, all the food on the table, no matter what it was. Everything from soup to nuts on the table all at the same time. And she, however, commenced the idea of serving food in a certain order. And evidently by the 1700s, this was pretty much in France, I'm talking about here, because we all know how refined the French are. They had a definite way of doing it, starting with, this was a supper. I like this because you look at the food here, you can read it. It starts out with 2 grandes entrées, which presumably means specials, although you can't actually read what they were. I can't. And then they had these potage, which is soup, and this word here, ouille, which I didn't know what it meant. I looked it up everywhere, couldn't find it until finally I remembered I had an ancient old Larousse dictionary, and I looked it up, and believe it or not, it means Spanish soup, spicy soup. So they had soup, both Spanish and spicy, and the potage, I can just about read it, and it seems to be pea soup and potato soup. We recognize those. Then the entrees, which is all sorts of stuff, pork cutlets and fish and so on and so forth. And then the roasts, which were separately ordered. And lastly, this thing here called petit entremets, which means little dishes which were actually desserts. That's what desserts were called before they were called desserts. And it's interesting because there's the sort of classic desserts that you know from French food, even as early as the middle of the 1700s. But it took a while for food to be, although it had become listed in a certain order when served to the table, for actually menus to be produced, which we now take for granted. Let's go. Here we go. And so, of course, when you're having these meals at the table and everybody's sitting down on both sides of the table, and it's all being served in a particular order, everything isn't all plunked in the middle of the table anymore, you need people to serve you. So then you start having footmen. And in the most fancy houses, you had a footman per guest. So that's what you've got here. You can see everybody's being served at the same time. But I read in, I think it was the Vanderbilt book, that we can now, in our time, or at least in the 1950s, which I guess it isn't our time anymore, we can now, our butler, if we have a butler, he can serve 8 people comfortably. I'm glad to know that, so that when you get your butler, you have 8 people. And if you've got more than 8 people, then you better employ a footman for the rest. Or at least for every 8 people, you're going to need another footman. So just bear that in mind next time your butler. But obviously, there have been times when people had 1 server per person. The standard, I've already talked about the standard order for French food in the French court, this is, which now is soup, fish, meat, vegetable separately. And when I was in my teens going to France for the first time, I can tell you that it's still in family homes how it was served. They did not put the vegetables on the same plate. They did not put everything was a new plate. The dishwashing was unbelievable. And then salad afterwards, not in front the way we do it in America. In Europe, everywhere, salad is served after the main meal, cheese, and then dessert. And the reason why you have the cheese before the dessert is because you use up the red wine before you go onto the sweet wines with the dessert. Now, in Britain, well known, of course, for being fine purveyors of food, as I'm sure you know, if you've ever been there, is that the muddled up anything on the table in any order that you like went right through into the middle of the 19th century. If you read any books that describe food being served in, let's say, 1815, 1830, you'll find that they would put out a roast beef and an apple pie at the same time. There's nothing uncommon about that. As we know, the Brits are not renowned for their cuisine. This is, however, nowadays a British standardized table setting. We know it's British because dessert is called pudding. You know, in England, dessert's called pudding. It doesn't mean it's a pudding. It could be a cake and it's still called pudding. And the order of the various wines, of course, various wine glasses. And the most important is the knives and forks, which, as I'm sure you all know, because I was saying earlier, I don't need to tell you half of this because, after all, we are middle-class Episcopalians, and if there's one thing we know is drinking and eating, right? So anyway, you use your equipment from the outside in. I'm sure you know that. And so now, we now have everybody sitting at the table. We have everybody close to each other, so we have to now have table manners so that it doesn't resemble feeding time at the zoo. Because it's not obvious, is it? Well, clearly that picture we had from the Renaissance where the guys were hugging each other at table, not paying a bit of attention to anybody else and doing what the heck they liked, that doesn't work anymore. And so we actually do have table manners. And so I thought I'd do this little list. Not that there's nothing new here at all. And in fact, what I shouldn't be telling you this, I should get the kids from the high school over here and tell them, right? They're the ones who really need to know. But anyway, so you watch the hostess and you take your cue from her. And you don't eat or drink until she does. If you're wearing gloves, you take them off and you put them on your lap. And if you have a formal toast, which if there's a formal meal in England, you toast the Queen, well, the King now, God bless him, you take your gloves off. If you're a woman, I'm sure you're a man too, but you wouldn't be wearing gloves. But if you've got, those long gloves on or any gloves, you take them off. You put your napkin in your lap. You do not put it under your chin unless the hostess does. And then you can. You do not fiddle with the table settings, and you don't put your hands on the table if you're not actually eating. And you sit up straight, you don't slouch, and you keep both feet on the floor. And that, I don't know if, I'm sure you're the same as us, you have grandchildren. Well, that's a joke, because, the slouching, the not sitting up straight, the hunched over the phone, and 1 foot on the back and 1 foot in the front is how they are all eating. That's why I should be talking to the high schoolers. You ask for items to be passed. You don't grab them. You use cutlery from the outside in. And we both know. You use both a knife and a fork. You do not cut up all your food like the dog's dinner. Put the knife down. Hold the fork like a pitchfork and start to eat like this, which is what I see every day when we go out. I'm sure you do too. It's incredible to me that we should have sunk so low. But I mean, my mother and father would, well, I don't know, they would have fainted if we behaved like that. You don't shout across the table. You talk equally to the person on your right and your left. In fact, in formal dinners, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, in a little bit of reading I'm going to do, in really, through the Victorian period, you were supposed to talk to the person on your right until they cleared away the first dishes. And on the left, after they, started with the second part of the service, it was like everybody did it the same thing, so that everybody knew where they were, and you weren't two sides trying to talk to the same person. It was very formalized. It goes without saying, don't talk with your mouth full, and unless with friends, no discussion of politics or religion at the table, and no personal remarks, such as, "Ooh, I do like your hair." Personal remarks are definitely not de rigueur, although I've just been reading and very much enjoying the history of the Regency period in England by J.B. Priestley, British writer of the first half of the 20th century. He says that he really appreciated the fact that during the Regency period, they had very entertaining dinner talk, because he read all sorts of letters that people wrote each other. And he said he would have appreciated that in England in the 1950s. And so that makes me think that perhaps I'm being a bit strict by saying that. Perhaps we do need to talk politics and religion and make many personal remarks, because at least it would make the dinner table interesting, right? Downton Abbey, of course, has become the standard for all of this. Please note that everybody does sitting straight up. They do not have their back against the chair, except Lord Grantham here, who has a bit of a slouch, but we'll forgive him that. Nobody has their hands on the table. Everybody has their hands in their lap. You can see the napkins are in the laps, just like it said. And you can see that because they are more than 8 people, they have not only Carson, the butler, but they also have a footman as well, who is going to serve all of that. And the same thing applied. Before we get there, the correct use of a knife and fork. It's a knife on top of the fork, not underneath, sawing away. I'm sure you know that, but you go to any restaurant any day and you see people who don't. And this is the servants' quarters, which they've been, I'm sure you've watched some of them, the sort of How We Made Downton Abbey type programs on the TV. And they all say they all had to have lessons in this in order to be able to be filmed doing the correct thing. The actors had to. So even in the, this is Christmas. If you have ever been in England at Christmas, we put on these funny paper hats that we get out of those Christmas crackers that you pull apart with your neighbor. They have a stupid joke in them, and usually a little toy of some description and a paper hat, and you de rigueur to wear the paper hat. So that's what they're doing. But you will see that they're all sitting up absolutely straight. Their hands are not on the table. They're on the knife and fork. They're using both a knife and a fork. And they're eating as you should. So, now, I come to the end of my story, which is after 400 years of dining etiquette, we have come full circle. No fork, no chair, eating standing up. Right? So if I compare it to this picture from 1066, you will see this is exactly what it was like. In fact, it even looks like pizza, doesn't it? They're waving their arms around. Look, legs, are they both feet on the ground? No, sirree. Drinking and carrying on, and whole fish on the table, a whole bird. There's a whole bird there. So it's all been for naught unless we do something about it. So I say my last message to you is to let's bring back elegant tables and the manners that go with them. Because only in that way will our children and our children's children and our children's children's children learn about this, because we've gone so far from good etiquette at table that I fear they'll never get back. When or where?
Where?
Oh, I don't know either. I just got it off the internet, but I think it's probably mid-century, mid-last century.
I thought it was at your house.
Well, it is true that I asked Frank if we could photograph our dining room, and he preferred it not to be made public. So, yes, actually, you know what it really is? It's one of those, you can go to them, they're called Renaissance. Actually, they call them, interestingly enough, quite wrongly, in England, you can go to places, and maybe you can here too, where they serve the medieval dinner. And they have these pewter plates. You can see this, look, pewter. It's not, chargers underneath. Of course, not medieval at all. We know that. We know that they were standing up eating cold pizza in the villages. But anyway, so that is the end of my prezo. And I did give everybody a bookmark. And if you like to go and look at my website, you can see some of my books are over there, by the way. But what I would like to do is maybe read a little bit to you from one of them, which concerns being at table. It doesn't concern etiquette specifically, in fact, but I thought it might be interesting. And then if you have any questions, obviously I'll be very, very glad to answer them. This story is called Cecilia, or Too Tall to Love. And you can tell why I wrote it, right? Cecilia is actually an orphan, has been brought up in a boarding school, and I'm not an orphan, but I was brought up in a boarding school. And at the end of it, she gets to the age where she is no longer a pupil. She becomes a teacher, but then the school is closed down, so she has to find something else to do. And her mentor at the school says to her, I know, because of course she thinks she's unmarriageable because she's so tall. And I certainly do appreciate that feeling myself. I don't feel that way anymore since we've been married nearly 50 years, right? Isn't it something terrible like that? But anyway, but when I was a girl, I certainly felt that way, and I could understand Cecilia. So I understand her feelings. So, but she does nevertheless, she goes to stay with an aunt and uncle who don't want her. And so their only thing is to get her married off. And so they arrange for her to go to these dinner parties and meet eligible gentlemen. And she does. She goes to one. She doesn't want to. She doesn't have either the wardrobe or, in her own opinion, the appearance for any of these. But she goes. And there she meets this young man about town whose name is Tommy. who is the Earl of something, it doesn't really matter. They're all earls in my books. Everybody's a lady and an earl and a lord and her ladyship and so on and so forth. I mean, that's part of the trope of the whole genre. So she meets him, and he's an absolute flibberty-gibbet who spends his whole time at the tailor's. And as she observes to herself when she meets him, that he's wearing a coat on his back which costs more than the average family would have to live on in London for a year. So she's not inclined to like him. The only trouble is he's so incredibly attractive. So, you can see right away they're going to end up together. It doesn't matter. There's no way she's going to escape. But at least in the beginning, and this is one of the things where she decides that she doesn't like him. So they're at table, and as I said, they spent half the evening, half the dinner, talking to the person on the right. She has to talk to him because he's on her left. She doesn't want to, but she has to. The person she was talking to before was a chaplain. These big houses had their own chaplains, and he was the chaplain of the house, a very pleasant fellow. And so she'd been explaining to him that she wanted to open a girls' school in the East End of London, because she wants to educate girls who would otherwise, the only course they would have is to go into prostitution, which is a historical fact. And so he was, of course, very supportive of that idea. But when she turns to Tommy, she doesn't she answers him in monosyllables. So Tommy had been aware of her chatting freely in her well-modulated voice to the gentleman on her right, and was surprised when she turned at last to him that she appeared not to want to talk to him. She answered his questions with little more than yes or no, and volunteered nearly nothing in return. He was a man of considerable address, and found her unwillingness to participate in his light-hearted conversation puzzling. Her calm gaze before dinner had piqued his interest. He had never met anyone like this unusual young woman before, with her glorious head of hair, dark eyes, and tall, stately carriage. Her shawl had slipped from her shoulders, and in the covert looks he had stolen at her while she was talking on the other side, he saw that her gown was lamentable, both in colour and shape. He was well known among the young women of the Tong for his impeccable taste in the matter of female attire. Now he found himself wishing he could buy her a gown. But if he had to describe her attitude towards him, he would have said that it bordered on dislike. In what way, he wondered, had he offended her? Finally, he decided to be blunt. "What have I done, Miss Beaumaris, that you should so dislike talking to me?" he said calmly. Sorry, my student. See you somewhere. Well, that you should so dislike talking to me. I don't. That is, I haven't. I can't imagine what you mean, my lord, she said, taken entirely by surprise. "Oh, I think you do," he replied gently. "I heard you carrying on an enthusiastic conversation with your other partner, but to me you have uttered only monosyllables or the merest platitudes. If I have offended you in some way, I beg you to tell me, so that I may put it right." Luckily for Cecilia, before she could respond, the footman offered her a platter of what looked like mutton with capers, which sounds terrible, but it was a dish they had at the time. Since she had eaten as much mutton as she hoped to ever see since living with her aunt and uncle, she took a very small helping, and then only toyed with it on her plate. "Quite right, Miss Beaumaris," said Tommy with a smile after the footman had moved on. "Mutton is one of those dishes one should avoid wherever possible. Now, where were we? Oh yes, you were going to tell me why you don't like me." This was said in such a friendly way that Cecilia was put off balance. But the footman was back, this time with a sliced pork pie surrounded by stewed apples. She helped herself. You can see this is English cuisine, right? Sliced pork pie with stewed apples. Anyway, never mind. She helped herself mechanically, furiously thinking how she was going to answer his lordship's question. When she looked down at her plate, she saw that she had taken a whole slice of pie and a quantity of apples. "Oh dear," she exclaimed, "I can't possibly eat all this." "Then don't," said his lordship reasonably. But that seems wicked when there are people without enough to eat, protested Cecilia. Ah, responded Tommy, putting a small slice of pie into his mouth. He chewed and swallowed. But eating more than you wish to, or eating something you do not care for, will not put food into the mouths of those unfortunate people. And all we end up with is everyone being unhappy, you for being overfull, and the starving for still being hungry. He took a sip from his wine glass. That is precisely the sort of argument I would expect someone like you to make, retorted Cecilia before she could stop herself. Someone like me? Replied Tommy with a lift of his eyebrows. But are you not someone like me? You are here at the same invitation as I, conversing with the same people as I, enjoying the same entertainment as I, eating the same meal as I. Cecilia spoke angrily before she had time to think. I could not be less like you, my lord. She returned to her earlier thought. I do not wear upon my back a coat that probably costs more than a working family in London may earn in a 12-month. Ah, I am beginning to perceive why you dislike me, commented his lordship, in no way disturbed by her rudeness. You think I am one of those frippery fellows who thinks of nothing but his raiment, who would no doubt step over a starving child to reach the door of his tailor's establishment. He appeared to contemplate the question for a moment. Would I wonder, step over a starving child in such circumstances? Perhaps if I were anxious to take possession of a very special coat, like this one, for instance, don't you think it would be worth it? His eyes danced. In spite of the fact he was clearly only teasing her, the question made her even angrier. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. You know you're talking nonsense. But I was taught that the dinner table with strangers was not the place to enter into personal discussions, and certainly not to cast animadversions upon one's neighbour's sartorial choices. Of course, Cecilia had been taught exactly the same, and by now she very much regretted her outburst. She was desperate to extricate herself from the abominable situation her sharp tongue, combined with the glasses of wine, had put her in. I understand that you may wish to put me in my place for my unwarranted outburst, she said rapidly, and all I can do is apologize for saying what I did. It is in no way any business of mine how you choose to dress. Now, please, can we end this dreadful dialogue? Miss Beaumaris, absolve me, I beg you, of any attempt to put you in your place, as you term it, replied her tormentor, who had, in fact, conceived a most unusual desire to do precisely that to this critical young woman. I have merely been trying to understand your dislike of me, and I think I may say I have now done so. You consider me a person with more money than sense, unashamedly selfish, and with no social conscience. Am I not right? This was said with another of the Earl's charming smiles, and it was that, together with the knowledge that he had pinpointed with absolute accuracy her opinion of him, that finally undid Cecilia. Please, my lord, she said in a low voice, trying to keep her voice even, though she felt a restriction at the back of her throat. Please, do not continue in this vein. I have apologized, and I apologize again. I should not have said what I did. I beg you let me eat the rest of my meal quietly, as I do not wish to make a spectacle of myself. She finished in a low voice, looking at him beseechingly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Tommy saw them and was ashamed. He knew what he had done. He gave her a brief nod of agreement and turned his attention to his dinner. After a minute, he stole a look at her profile and was admiring her long neck and lustrous hair, when he was dismayed to see a single tear drop onto her plate. He was not by nature unkind, and the thought that he had brought this strange young woman to tears affected him powerfully. Do not allow it to upset you, he said very quietly, without turning his head. It really is of no consequence, you know. But she gave no sign that she had heard him. I'm not telling you that. You have to read the book. It's a long story. Exactly. A very complicated story. No, not complicated at all. My stories are never complicated. Anyway, so there we are. So much for etiquette. Any questions,
I have
comments?
them.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is that when I've been in Europe and my child who in Europe for quite a long time can very easily manage the knife and fork thing. I am so not like him. And I was never brought up to do anything other than cut down, pick up.
Oh,
fork with
really?
my hand, and that's very.
Well, you know, it is very American. Interestingly enough, in this is the earliest book, the one that I started out with. She actually says that, and she says that's the correct way to eat. She said that knives at table, since the time of the Borgias, have been taken as being weapons, and therefore use them as little as possible. That's what she says in here. I was astonished when I read it, because I was brought up exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So it may well be that what I said about not cutting up your food like the dog's dinner was actually a European thing, not an
I
American.
agree with that one, but I just don't understand how it just isn't comfortable. It feels weird to
Use
do this
both.
and then eat.
You know, yeah,
I suppose left-handers don't have that problem, but I do.
yeah.
You know,
I don't know. I really couldn't say. I'm so used to it. We eat peas with our fork this way, not this way. I mean, we were taught to balance our peas on. Why? I don't eat peas anyway, thank God. But why? I don't know.
I eat my peas with honey. I've done it all my life.
Oh, that's right.
And I have not, and oh, I forgot that one. It keeps them on my knife.
What's the line?
Keeps them on my knife. Yeah.
So it's kind of funny, but it keeps them on my knife.
Okay, well, there you go. Yeah.
I had British relatives, and I was always taught that if you want something passed, you don't say, please pass. You always say, would you like some more, Louise, would you like some more peas?
Oh, I've never heard
And
that.
then that means that you want some.
Oh.
But you're also giving that person an opportunity.
Oh, well, that's-
The polite way of saying, we should take some first.
Well, I've never heard that, but I don't dispute it. I think that
Yeah.
there are a lot of strange customs associated with it.
And the
Yes.
other thing is that if you ever go to the Culinary Institute of America now, it was a long, long time ago, but they have a French restaurant there. And when you are served, everybody, you have your own personal waiter. And they, everyone at the table gets served.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's
And it's all done, very quick.
very French. Yeah.
It's very perfect. Everything.
Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
I just wanted to share a piece of Palmer family lore. My dad was a hardworking salesman in New York City. He would come home for dinner. Sometimes the only thing he said to us the whole time at the dinner table was elbows off the table.
Oh, yeah.
Elbows off.
Elbows off the table. Yeah.
Well, Dad, do you love us? Come on.
Tell us about your day. Elbows off the table. Yeah. Yeah. Or nowadays, if you go in the dining halls, I think the whole body is on the table, and the kids are in pajamas. So, no, yeah, really.
It was the same thing about the elbows. I mean, that
Yeah.
was the big thing that I remember, but
Yeah.
What was the big deal about the elbows?
I don't know.
I think it's just that it's. I don't know. I guess it's.
Yeah, my grandfather would take the heaviest thing he could find and whack us.
That's not for the Teaches a lesson.
I think that chewing with your mouth open was a deal on my.
Oh yeah, I didn't mention that one. I should have said. Or did I? Eat with your mouth closed? Yes, I did. Yeah. That's another one, which I think it's gone by the board. Because, judging what I see.
I don't remember if we were, at any rate, what I wanted to say is my husband talks about in the service, World War II, that if American soldiers went into a restaurant and they were served pie, everyone knew that they were American because they always turned the pie point toward them. Have you heard that?
No.
And they could, and sometimes, if they were trying to hide and not be found, that was the one thing that immediately clued in.
So
Because they would eat it with a fork, and they needed to get the skinny end first.
There you go.
Yeah. Yes, it's true to say that in England we eat pie with a spoon.
Yeah, I can imagine.
How else would you eat it? Just with a
With a spoon.
Yeah. But I would
It
like,
doesn't matter where you
I would
start.
like to sing the praises of this woman because she happened to, we were together. She gave Charlie a book. And Charlie has not been able to put down a single book of hers that he's gotten, although he reads them on Kindle. And he's read every single one. So he's waiting for this next one that you just said is out.
Well,
But the one thing he hasn't done is put the praises on, is it on Amazon where they should?
yeah, to do a review. Yes, I
Yes.
would say that if you do, not only me, but if you buy a book on Amazon from anybody,
Yeah.
please give a review, because Amazon has this system, probably you know, that the number of downloads or purchases, although to be honest, downloads of ebooks, I mean, are very, very much greater than purchases of paperback books these days. I mean, I know I sell 100 downloads to one paperback, that many difference. But the number of downloads plus the number of reviews, not whether they're 4 or 5 star reviews, but just the sheer number of reviews, moves you to the top of their algorithms. Now, nobody knows what an algorithm is. Even the people who made up the algorithms don't really know what they are, as far as I can tell. But what it does is, when you put anything, if you sell anything on Amazon, whether it's a can of peas or a book, you put them into a category, tins of vegetables, or, you know, a romance novel, and you have these categories, and the more downloads and the more reviews, the higher you get up on the list of people selling that same thing. And the higher you're on the list, the more likely it is that when you open Amazon on your computer and go to books or Kindle books or ebooks or whatever, however you buy your books, that my book will pop up because it's been sort of popular or something. So that's why it's not only for me. I'm not saying it personally, although I do like reviews, but it's for everybody. That's how you because, there are something like, I think the number is something like 86 million books on Amazon. And so, how is your little book going to ever get to the top of any tree or get somebody to notice it? It has to get up those algorithms. Yeah. So there we are.
Louise, Diane online has a question.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, hi, Louise. Thanks for taking my question. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I couldn't tell who was speaking, but I was also taught to cut first, set down the knife, then switch hands and eat with a fork, just to let you know.
Okay.
So when I went to Europe, I felt very out of place because I didn't know how to, do this, put the fork in my mouth that way. But that was not my comment. My comment
okay.
is
I was going to say, it's a good thing that you aren't a spy then, because they'd know immediately you were an American.
absolutely. But my comment is this. When I was young, I was a waitress putting myself through college, and I, waited on big events, kind of formal events, weddings and so forth. So I know how to set a table. And so recently I was at a friend's house and I was setting the table, and her granddaughter, who's a 20-something, was seated at her place already. And she proceeded to pick up the silverware that I had laid properly and moved it all in one clump to the side of her plate. And yeah, and I have to say, like you, I saw that and thought, she's not even respecting the fact that I'm laying the table properly. She's not taking the time to observe that I've put out the silverware properly, and does not care. She's just picked it all up and plopped it down where she wanted it.
Yeah.
And
What can
so
you do?
exactly, what can we do?
When you showed the picture of the table setting,
Mhm.
I was taught by a Holland America, somebody at Rutgers, when I went on a cruise, and she did a whole thing, and we got placemats with the things all outlined so you could
This one.
put them in the right place. But the pudding fork and the pudding spoon were done this way at the top of the plate.
Yes, well, I agree with you. And when I was brought up, we did that too. But I think in this case, it's because there's such a number of wine glasses and then the water tumbler that there really isn't room. and I've noticed this is the way. I did have a picture. In fact, I thought I had it on my presentation, but I must have not put it in at the end. And it was from Buckingham Palace. And that they did it this way. They didn't put the knife and fork at the top.
There's I think it's.
I mean, the spoon and fork.
Opening or the ending of, Hyacinth.
Oh, yeah. Ha!
And
Okay.
it's looking at, she's looking at the table setting and the dessert things are here and she moves them back to this in that opening.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to see
I
here
wonder why
on the Downton Abbey one.
they're about.
Yeah. See, they don't have the spoon and fork, as far as I can tell, at the top, but then they don't have a spoon at all, so I don't really know. Yeah, but I know what you mean, because that's definitely how my mother always set the table and how I always used to set the table. But now I do it that way.
Now you don't get the dessert stuff until you get the dessert.
That's true. Yeah, you serve this fork or the spoon or whatever it is with the dessert. Yeah.
Is anyone else but me offended when you are at a restaurant, not a fast food, but a restaurant, they say, would you please hang on to your fork and knife? It's just so ballistic.
That's just so,
I sometimes if I summon my courage in time, I say, no, thank you, I'd like clean.
Clean ones, yeah.
That just drives me crazy.
I know. I don't like it in restaurants, which is really is an American thing in restaurants, and I understand why they do it. But the minute you've finished eating, they clear away your plate, even if other people in the party are still eating, which we don't do that in Europe. You leave it until everybody's finished. And because it makes the people who are still eating feel so self-conscious if they're the only one left with a knife and fork. In fact,
start until everyone is served.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's certainly true. And my mother taught me not to finish before the hostess. In other words, you'd be pushing around, something on your plate, pretending to eat it until you saw the hostess had put her knife and fork down, and then you would eat whatever the last bite was and put yours down, because it wasn't polite to make it seem as though either she was slow or that you were, a gobble guts, because you gobbled it all down, or she hadn't given you enough food. Yeah, precisely.
Do they still teach anybody that when you're not done, you put your silverware this way, and when you are done, you put it there?
That's an American thing. In Europe, we absolutely have to put our knife and fork together on the table, on the plate, not on the table. Put your knife and fork together with the fork tines down, and that's finished.
As a child, my toddler silverware, the little thing, had something called a pusher.
Yes, that's right. I used to,
upside down. Oh,
yeah.
That was ever so useful.
Yes, as an adult, we could do it.
Yes.
Can I comment? Jim, that really is an interesting comment you made, because I remember fighting my mother-in-law was wonderful about being perfect about this kind. And an older woman said, etiquette gives you the rules to follow. And if we don't have those rules to follow, then we just don't know what to do. So I softened my approach.
I think it's like all rules. I get that a lot with punctuation. Being a writer, punctuation is pretty important. And I believe that punctuation is one of those things that you have to know the rules. But if you choose to ignore them, knowing what the rules are, and you do it for stylistic purposes, that's up to you. Like beginning a sentence with and things like that. And I think it's the same with table manners. So long as you know what the right ones are, it's okay if you decide to eat your pizza with your fingers. At least you know what the right ones are when the time comes. But the problem is, I think nowadays people don't know what the right ones are, do they, at all?
And they were talking about how manners are a sign of respect for the people that you're dealing with.
Well, I think that's very true. Yeah.
That's why you dress, because otherwise you're saying, well, you don't matter.
Mm-hmm. So, well, I think it's probably time, unless there are any more burning questions, that we end it. And thank you very much for being such a great audience. And it was really nice to see you. Thank you.